Constant debate about accountability in our schools has obscured other more fundamental topics of discussion. One of these is curriculum and instruction. Of the many reforms created in these fields, none is more geographically widespread than the International Baccalaureate. Originally developed to aid international schools in preparing students for diverse universities, IB has become a K-12 innovative reform for both public and private schools, now numbering close to 3,000 worldwide. Today we bring two Vancouver IB educators to Your Education Matters. Jim McConnell of Stratford Hall is head of a respected private K-12 school that is at the vanguard of IB implementation. Dr. McConnell is Stratford Hall's founding head. Gary Little is a career educator who rose through the ranks of the Vancouver School District to serve as principal of Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School and as associate superintendent. Both former teachers are active in international baccalaureate governance internationally. Today we are pleased to invite you to learn about the IB program as it is delivered here in British Columbia on Your Education Matters. As a teacher, my subject matter was history, and I still understand things best by understanding their history. So would you start us off, Jim, by giving us the history of IB?
Sure. It's interesting when I meet with parents coming to the school, I feel the same way. I think that they need to know how this all started. So a little over 40 years ago at École Internationale de Genève, they were faced with a problem of conflicting national systems that they were teaching, and so they worked with a few people, including a fellow named Alex Peterson, who was a professor at Oxford, to come up with this program that would combine the best. And it was the genesis of the IB and the United World Colleges. The IB started as a very small organization, in fact was introduced into North America about that time, but really I think grew in the 80s, both public and independent schools. And then in the mid-90s, they adopted two other programs that had been developed elsewhere, and that was the middle years program. The original was the diploma program, just grade 11 and 12, and so the middle years, which is essentially grade 6 to grade 10, and then the primary years program in 1997 was grades kindergarten to grade 5, essentially. And at first, when we started our school in 2000, they were in existence, but nobody thought that schools would do all three, and IB, in fact, said these are standalone programs. But there's been enough pressure that I think now we pretty well understand them as a continuum that about 150 schools in the world do all three programs. It's interesting, the public schools have been, in North America, really driving it, I think, more than the independent schools.
One of the things I would add to what Jim has said is that initially the IB really flourished in international schools, international private schools. But today we see the greatest growth area, in fact, in the public school system. North America, between Canada and the United States, has the largest number of schools. In fact, of the schools worldwide, North America represents about 50%. The United States has the most schools. Canada has the second greatest number of programs and schools offered within the IB. The one piece that I think is really critical, looking back to the origins of the program, is that as global societies have changed and as mobility has increased throughout the world, the requirement almost for a kind of standardized, well-understood international baccalaureate program is part of the driving reason behind the program. Children of diplomats, for example, business people who are working in different countries, those children now have a certified program that is understood worldwide. So that was, I think, an important part of the origin of the program as well, as to what Jim has said.
I can see someone being concerned about a loss of local control or provincial autonomy in terms of the curriculum. How do you respond to policymakers when they say that this would be a concession to external control, not only from a federal influence, but from a global influence?
Well, maybe I could, because it's a timely question. I was just in Alberta last week and shared the stage with Mr. David Hancock, who's Minister of Education for the province of Alberta. And one of the challenges faced in Alberta currently is that very issue, the autonomy of the Alberta diploma versus the IB diploma program. And a concern that exists within government, if not within the educational circle per se, but within government, that to fully embrace the IB diploma, in other words, to eliminate the need for Alberta examinations, Alberta kind of standards, is a risk that at this point at least the province is looking at, but they're not prepared to take. British Columbia for several years now has treated International Baccalaureate studies at the high school level as standalone programs with full credentialing. In fact, the universities recognize them as such. UBC is at the very vanguard of that in Canada.
Jim, could you expand a little bit on
Sure.
how this works, that a student can get the IB diploma and that it translates into equivalency with some British Columbia standards?
Certainly, and I'd like to talk about that and the other two programs because they're quite different. So the diploma program is a full curriculum. It has a content, it's content driven, and there are examinations at the end. And through a lot of good work by the public schools in this province who are running the IB program, the ministry has for several years granted full equivalency. And so they look at the content that's covered in an English course, for example, in the IB as being fully equivalent to what's done in the British Columbia ministry. It allows schools like us who do exclusive IB then the ability to really focus our resources on the IB curriculum. It's a huge advantage, I think, in British Columbia because we can do the IB, I think, much better because of that. But it needs to be, I think, emphasized that the other two programs, which are the primary years and middle years, are not curriculum driven. And the IB makes a very strong point that it's the local curriculum that must be taught. They know that, for example, in British Columbia, we must teach the British Columbia curriculum, and it's a very good curriculum. So it's a framework. It's a way of teaching the curriculum. It's inquiry-based. It has lots of nuances and levels, but it's really about pedagogy. It's about how students learn. And so it's a case of, in fact, the craft I think that we have in our schools in British Columbia is to create the framework around the British Columbia curriculum. So we're inspected by the ministry. They look to make sure we're covering off on all the objectives from kindergarten to grade 12, and we do that.
Well, let me tunnel down a little bit. I had the privilege of visiting Stratford Hall recently, including visiting elementary and primary classrooms. When you say that it's not content-driven, that it's conceptually driven, I think the average viewer needs some explanation of what you mean by that.
And it's interesting because, of course, we all know what we grew up with, and we grew up with grade 3 math and grade 3 social studies and grade 3 English and maybe even specialized teachers teaching those. And the IB turns that all on its head and says that in early learning, especially in the primary years, it's about big ideas. Mm-hmm. And so there are 6 big themes that are studied through the year, each about 6 weeks. And these themes cover big thoughts. And that's where we put the British Columbia curriculum in. We'll throw some science and some social studies and some language arts. And so the students are then in an inquiry-based program. It's critical thinking, it's inquiry. It's, I say to people, if our students at the end of grade 5 know how to ask good questions, then we've done our job.
Can you tell us a little more about methodology and what these early grades classrooms look like in terms of the way the curriculum is being delivered that's unique because it's an IB system?
Well, it's, I think the teachers who teach IB are incredible practitioners because they really have to craft the knowledge base that has to be there, right? We know that there are certain things that have to be done. But you do it through a way that is through inquiry so that it's the questions that are led by the teacher at first, but then the students' questions that continue driving into depth. So rather than a lot of superficial coverage, you'll find that an IB class will go into much more depth in certain subjects. And it engages the kids into not only deep thinking, but contemporary thinking. So it's often related to, say, current events. We have a unit of inquiry, this is what these things are called, units of inquiry, called Wild Weather in grade 4, for example. And that's a 6-week look at all sorts of weather that's happened. Well, imagine how wonderful it is to craft your curriculum on what's been in the news, the hurricane or the landslide or the drought or global warming.
If I can add to what Jim's saying, one of the things that I'm very aware of is that good practice is good practice. Yeah. And what we see with the IB Primary Years program is good practice within or without the IB at the primary level. And that's the kind of learner-centered approach to inquiry that Jim has just described. And I see that in classrooms that are non-IB as well as in classrooms that are IB. I think what Jim is pointing out is that the focus within IB is very much an inquiry-based approach to student learning and the teaching that's required for that.
And these themes you spoke of, are they developed unique to the school, or do they come?
No, they are international. The six guiding themes are driven. Any IB school you'll walk into in the world will have, if it's a primary years program, you'll walk into a classroom and you'll know right away which of the units of inquiry they're working on. Now, the unit of inquiry, who we are, where are we in place and time, how the world works. There are 6 of them that have those global kinds of statements. There's an IB descriptor that says this is what we're looking for. After that, it has to be driven by the school, not even by the province. Each school has to develop its own what's called program of inquiry. And so in our school, you might have seen the map on the wall that has the 36 units of inquiry, 6 per grade times 6 grades. Parents can walk in and they can see the real content that's covered in the curriculum in one page.
All right, so what does this add to the experience and learning of the student to have this? It's a kind of a superstructure or umbrella over the regular curriculum, kind of unifying picture of themes and structural elements. Why is that making the school a better place to learn?
If I could jump ahead and answer the question by looking at the diploma
Please,
program, it's a great question, because what IB stresses is the fact that students, to be truly engaged in their learning, have to be an active participant. This is the inquiry-based approach. But it's also looking across connections from one subject area to the next. And that's something that IB doesn't want to see lost as students enter into the diploma program, so that you have integrating elements within the IB diploma. Theory of knowledge, for example, explores how students can relate learning from one area to another. In fact, when you think of the great thinkers of all time, they didn't work in compartments. They didn't work as mathematicians on a Tuesday and artists on a Thursday. They integrated their learning. And that really, I think, is one of the goals of IB, and it starts with the primary years program. It goes through the middle years. Of course, the curriculum becomes more specialized through middle years and diploma, but those integrating elements are never lost.
Okay.
Well, Paul, I had an interesting experience early on in our school's life. We were the only primary years school within the local organization. It was public, primarily public secondaries. And I remember we hosted one of the meetings, and I took that time to explain what the PYP was to all these diploma coordinators. Wonderful people. They were huge helps for us. And I remember going through it. To do it in 15 minutes is impossible, but I managed to get at least some of it done. And I remember 2 very seasoned IB coordinators, and one of them said, wow, if kids are coming up to our diploma program like this, then we're going to have to change the way we teach. And the other one said, and wouldn't that be a good thing? And I thought that was just exactly right, because if you have kids coming all the way up through this, then you are into an inquiry seminar style grade 11, 12 program, I think.
Okay, well, thank you. On that note, we'll take a momentary pause and be back in just a second.
I was ready. When I first came to SFU, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. So I started into a specialized French cohort program and got involved in the French Student Union, thinking for sure that I wanted to go into journalism. When I got into my second semester, I suddenly wasn't so sure what I wanted to do anymore. So I started to explore a little bit. Archaeology, communications, history, even kinesiology. And then I decided to go on exchange to France for a year. I was really enjoying my history classes and quickly realized that's what I wanted to study. But all the exploring I had done in other departments still counted towards my degree. I also got involved in campus life. I was an orientation leader for a year, became a community advisor in residence, helped start a choir. I even took a rowing course. Now I'm in my 5th year, studying a history major and French and poli-sci minors, and I'm still involved in residence. I'm an area coordinator now and working on sustainability initiatives around campus. After SFU, I have lots of possibilities of what I could do. International development, leadership, teaching. But whatever I do, I know I'll be ready for it.
You both have been explaining a number of the unique factors that make IB a quality program, and I know another one is the professional development of the people who work in it. So, Jim, I'd like you to lead off a discussion of the Pro-D methodology.
I think it's one of the strengths of the IB, the insistence that there's a great deal of Pro-D that's done, and in fact an awful lot of Pro-D has to be done before a school's even authorized. On the downside, it's expensive, you know, and to be able to run the kinds of Pro-D that you want is sometimes difficult. But there are levels, and it's developing internationally into a very, very strong, I say global system of professional development in really important pedagogical issues. So the beginnings are about the shape of the texture of the IB, but pretty quickly you're into evaluation and into inquiry, critical thinking, all of those kinds of very important pedagogical pieces that exist in classrooms all over the place. So you know, I think it's important that schools do spend a lot of money, and then teachers come back and they share, and it just elevates the conversation in the school to a level that I've never seen before, because everybody is working at higher and higher levels.
Is there anything that, if we were observing it, we'd see that seemed different from the normal Pro-D experiences that all of us have had?
It's systematized, and so I think that rather than being a shot over here and a shot over here, which tends to dominate, I think, a lot of Pro-D, it's really a spiral, I suppose, and people do a level 1, level 2, level 3, and they'll do level 3 in one topic and come back and share a level 3 in another topic. And so I think there's a consistency. There's also I mean, we know IB's full of jargon, so you're consistent with that, you're consistent with the philosophy of inquiry-based learning. All of that's consistent within the Pro-D. So I think it makes it more powerful.
A couple of other things. One is differentiated so that you have beginning teachers generally with other beginning teachers in a program. That's the level 1 piece. Administrators, they have separate workshops. Coordinators have other workshops. But apart from that, the other thing that's very interesting to me is that people take this Pro-D of their own volition. It's not something that, well, there's a mandated piece, one has to do it for the school to be authorized. These are people who generally sign up of their own volition. They're excited about it, they show up excited about it, and having volunteered as a workshop leader on occasion, I can say that the people who are there really are excited about the topics. The other thing that I've observed is that people come from a number of different school districts and jurisdictions. So what you end up with is you end up with this incredibly fertile conversation of people who come from very disparate points of view. You take a right-to-work state like the state of Texas and talk about labor relations issues with somebody from the province of Ontario, a totally different landscape. And the conversations are absolutely incredible because they look at each other like, we work in the same profession, but boy, we sure come from different worlds.
Well, we talk about motivating students, but what I hear you saying is this motivates teachers also.
I think so.
Absolutely.
I think so.
In fact, if I can just add, one of the things I really did notice in my work at Sir Winston Churchill School is the fact that the workshop development that came through IB was really of significance to the staff at Churchill, and not just, I think, influenced positively the IB teachers within the school, but all teachers within the school.
Another topic I want to make sure we look at is the evaluation systems that are within IB, because this has been key to its success, as people all over the world have great confidence in what it means to receive that diploma. So could you talk with us about how standards are maintained in evaluation and why there's so much confidence?
Well, it's the standards, and I'm going to speak again about the diploma program because I think that's really what we're talking about. And what is important for International Baccalaureate, two things. Number one, that the program does build accessibility for students. At the same time, it maintains high quality control, if we want to use that term. Evaluation and assessment is at the root of the quality control. But that sounds pretty much top-down and rather draconian, and I don't mean it that way, because IB looks at evaluation, as we all do, two ways, formative and summative. Formative to guide instruction, summative just as a determination with some sense of finality about how students have learned within that program. What is insisted on is that there are clear standards, that the standards are evaluated fairly and consistently throughout the world, frankly, and that people who teach within IB are clear on those standards, are clear on the practice that leads to student learning, and that there's a system of moderation where there are 5,000 examiners throughout the various courses, IB, and they're trained so that they're, when they moderate, to ensure that there's consistency of application of standard, that there's a fairness to that. And I would add that in addition to the external assessment, there's also internal assessment. So there's a point of view that teachers know best about the students in their program, and that's acknowledged through the internal assessment. However, there is some debate whether the external assessment, which is currently about 70 to 80% depending on subject area of the mark, is too heavily weighted in terms of the external piece.
I've had my thinking about assessment turned on its head by my involvement with the IB diploma, where I used to think that something that counted as much as those final exams would be very stress-inducing. A lot of people think that. But as Gary mentioned, that the examinations are well designed and we have confidence in them, and the criteria to which the students are answering the questions are clear to the students. The examinations are extraordinarily fair. There's lots of choice in them. There's hardly any multiple choice, right? They're almost all written kinds of essays and comparisons and analyses and all those kinds of things. And I had an experience last year with a student walking down the hall, asking him in April how he was looking forward to his May, which is when these IB exams are written, and he said, excited. And I said, why? And he said, because I now, after 2 years, get to show off what I've been learning. And that, to me, is what these examinations can promote. Rather than stress and nervousness, excitement. And it's a profound difference for me.
In fact, and I appreciate that point, that the exams, more than any other exams that I've looked at as an educator, really examine critical thinking and give students the opportunity to critically examine topics where there is an element of choice within that.
Well, and that raises the question of how would you like to see IB evolve? Obviously, one way would be to be more inclusive of other student populations, but both of you, I'm sure, have thought about this. Where would you like to see the program headed in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, I should mention, and I think Jim has alluded to that the primary years program, the middle years program are highly inclusive, basically whole school programs. It's really the diploma program that comes under scrutiny for the level of accessibility to it. I think any perceptions about IB as being elitist probably came from that issue. How accessible is the diploma program? And IB as an organization is really pushing accessibility, and I support that 100% as an educator. However, to make the program more accessible, the issue of cost has to be looked at, and IB is aware of that and is doing things about that. One of the ways that costs could be reduced is to look at how the authorization process works. To this point, it's been school by school by school. Is there a possibility, for example, to authorize an entire district? Could the Vancouver School District be authorized and then within the district offer programs as it sees fit and be held accountable for the quality of those programs? There would be obvious cost savings to going that route. Another way is using technology for purposes of professional development, for purposes of course offerings, for purposes even of shipping examinations back and forth from the exam center, because that's hugely costly. And those initiatives are all underway. So IB is going that route. In addition, in terms of accessibility, I really think the doors have to be opened more broadly to students with special needs. To this point, there are accommodations. There are schools that offer the program to students with autism, to students with Asperger's. I think that's a step in the right direction. I would just like to see that possibility opened up so that those students have the same opportunities moving on to post-secondary as other students.
But it speaks to the tension, I think, that does exist within the organization now, because there are about 3,000 schools now, 10,000 schools 10 years from now. It is an exponential growth. And I know when I've been at international conferences, one of the big issues for the heads is how do we maintain the standards that we have? So the tension to me is how do you maintain the standards of this widely understood and internationally recognized credentialing, especially at the diploma program, and at the same time open it up, be more accessible. And I think we want both of those, and that's where the tension exists.
Well, thank you. Thank you both very much for helping us to understand the IB program. And I hope that we get the opportunity to see it in action all around Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, as well as other places in British Columbia. Thank you. We'll be back in a moment. By definition, the substance of education is the curriculum. By this we mean what is taught to students and, in a parallel fashion, how that material is taught. British Columbia historically has had a more coherent curriculum than most places in North America due to the cooperation of the stakeholder groups in education. Nonetheless, a respected worldwide curricular reform, the International Baccalaureate, is making an impression on our schools. For parents and teachers who want to escape the traditional confines of disciplinary structure and reinvent the school through a focus on timeless and holistic ideas, IB is providing a global alternative. IB also transcends the normal accountability debate. Much of its testing is through writing rather than standardized tests, and this approach has won the respect of universities and governments around the world. We would do well to remember that ultimately there is more to school and the curriculum than standardized tests can ever measure. Innovations such as IB help us keep open the door of educational possibility. Thank you for watching Your Education Matters.